Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Many of you know that during COVID, a lot of stuff changed with schooling. Schools went to remote learning. And a lot of people right now, when I say, remote learning, are thinking, kids that are at home watching a screen instead of sitting in a classroom at a school. But the interesting thing is, what about colleges? And this raises an interesting point, because if you were to go to college and sign an agreement to pay for, room and board along with your education, and then they came to you and said, oh, by the way, we're going remote, so leave, go home, and we're going to work with you there. Now you're sitting at home thinking, why did I pay for the room and board? So people asked if they could get that money back, and the school said, no, we don't give money back. So a lawsuit was filed in Michigan, and the court came to an interesting conclusion, but sided with the schools and said, no, you don't get your money back. So David Jesse wrote this for the Detroit Free Press, the paper I delivered as a child. Brad sent me a note and said, Steve, check this out. Court says Michigan universities didn't have to give students tuition or housing refunds. So they don't have to. If they want to, they can. But now they see this, they won't. Michigan public universities do not have to pay refunds to students after pushing them into remote learning during the early days of COVID. The Michigan Court of Appeals said this recently after the Michigan Court of Claims had heard the case and also said no. The tuition contracts assessed fees as the result of registration, not as a result of receiving services, the court said in its decision. So if you read the contract that you sign to go to school, it says you have to pay this money to register. It never says you're paying the money for the services you think you're buying. We find no error in the trial court's conclusion that unambiguous terms of the tuition contract rendered students liable for paying tuition once they registered for classes. In all cases, and there's several of them, the university plaintiffs claim the university defendants breached their agreements by failing to provide live in-person instruction. So first we're talking about the classes. The university plaintiffs, however, have pointed to no contractual language in which the university defendants promised that these would be in-class instructions. And that's the interesting thing, is that everyone assumed I'm going to go to school and sit in a class, because that's what they've done for the last 400 years. Well, no, it just says that we'll instruct you. It doesn't say we'll actually instruct you on campus in a classroom. But that's crazy talk. The decision was made by a 3-judge panel. We'll get back to that. The ruling consolidated cases against Eastern Michigan, Central Michigan, and Lake Superior State University. In all cases, a student argued that he or she should have gotten some refunds when their classes went virtual and students were sent home from campus. Now, one judge had a slightly different take on it and said, in the end, there is a growing body of evidence, including evidence in this record, that students of all ages suffered significant educational setbacks. It adds insult to injury for a university student to have to pay full price for emergency remote learning when that student allegedly bargained for much different educational services. As I review the record, there remains a genuine issue of material fact on plaintiff's tuition claims. The parties should have the opportunity for full discovery. So he's basically saying, look, they should at least let it go to trial. But the other 2 judges say no, and it's a 3-judge panel, so they lose. The court also sided with the university on housing refunds, and that's where, to me, it gets silly. It said that each university, the housing contract had specific clauses in it that allowed for the university to not give refunds. For example, at Lake Superior State, the housing contract said the contract should be voided or could be voided for an act of nature or an act of God. In other words, these contracts expressly contemplated circumstances under which it is necessary to remove students from housing for reasons of health, safety, and welfare. And in March 2020, all public universities sent students home as COVID-19 spread. Classes continued, but online only. No public universities gave refunds for tuition. Some gave refunds for meal plans or housing contracts that were unused. But again, the appeals court says that they charged you for registration for these things, but they never actually said the money you're paying us is for teaching in a certain style or for the like a rental, like landlord-tenant situation. No, you're registering and you pay to register. Once you've registered and we've let you registered, the contract is complete, which I find a little odd. So you might say, Steve, what about the judges? Well, the 3-judge panel were Judge Kirsten Frank Kelly, Judge James Robert Redford and Judge Brock Swartzel. I don't know about Judge Brock Swartzel, but I can tell you about the other two people. And I'm sure you caught one of them. But if you're from Michigan, there was an attorney general here who was beloved for decades named Frank Kelly. Frank Kelly was the man. I mean, there were books written about him. He was that popular and that important. And he was an attorney general who spent years fighting for consumers. That was his thing. And AGs have got a lot of stuff on their plate, but he actually made a point and said, you know something, I'm going to take care of consumers. That's going to be like one of my primary objectives. And so he spent a lot of time doing consumer protection work. And so when you are running for judge, and most people have got no idea who any of the candidates are, if your name looks like Frank Kelly, there's a good chance name recognition will get you elected. So Kirsten Frank Kelly, that's her legal name. That is her legal name, but she made sure to put that on all the things that might involve, voting, like ballots. And so she was running for judge as Kirsten Frank Kelly. And a lot of people, like myself, think there's a good chance that helped her get elected. And then later on, she moved up to the Court of Appeals. Now, James Robert Redford, don't know anything about him either. I'm willing to bet, though, that as people scan the list of potential judges they can vote for, and they see one that says James Robert Redford, it's got a nice ring to it. I say we elect the guy. Why not? And there was a time, and I'm not sure how true this is today. I'd have to literally stop and think about it for a bit. But in a couple counties in Michigan, primarily Wayne County and Oakland County, if you had a Irish-sounding name like McDonald, there's a very good chance you get elected judge. Just a very good chance. Get your name on the ballot, you'll get elected. And a lot of these people were not related to each other, but you see a whole bunch of McDonald's getting elected. And so for some odd reason, don't know why, but people seem to think, Irish name, law and order, I guess, vote for him or her. And then the interesting thing is that over on the east side, which is Macomb County, there's something about Italian-sounding names, and a whole bunch of Italian-sounding names get elected. And I know what you're thinking. You're going to say, Steve, isn't it possible that there's a whole bunch of people in that community who are of that background? The Irish background, I'm not so sure about that. And I think just what it was is that back in the old days, when the courts were smaller and several of the judges just happened to be of Irish descent or had Irish-sounding names, that people started equating that with, that's what a judge's name sounds like. And so when they go to vote, they go, someone named McDonald is running for judge, I'll vote for him. And I know you think I'm making this up, but I'm not. And I've talked about this with other attorneys, and I've actually seen people who announced they were running for judge, and they're doing it because of their name. And so Kirsten Frank Kelly is one of those people that, and again, she might be the greatest Court of Appeals judge who's ever lived. I'm not actually knocking her, but I'm simply pointing out that a lot of people in Michigan who voted for her probably had no idea who she was, what she stood for, if anything. Just simply that name looked familiar for some reason. And that's going to go away a little bit because Frank Kelly's been out of office for a while now. But Kirsten Frank Kelly, I remember looking at that name going, wow, that works out for you, doesn't it? So getting back to the original story, the Court of Appeals in Michigan has said that Michigan universities do not have to give students tuition or housing refunds because, number one, that's not what you sign up for. The contract actually says you pay to register for classes, not pay to receive classes. And then also, the contract does have a clause for an act of God, and that would cover these kinds of things. So there you go. Brad, thanks for sending it. David Jesse of the Detroit Free Press wrote it. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life.